All right, and good afternoon, everybody. Top of the afternoon to you, Dan.
Hello.
Happy Saint. It is Saint Patrick's Day, right?
St. Patrick's Day.
All right, happy Saint Patrick's Day, everybody. Do you know, Dan, the history of Saint Patrick's Day?
Not as well as I should. I know that he brought the gospel to Ireland.
Is that why we celebrate Saint Patrick's Day?
Well, somewhere in there, snakes got involved. I'm not sure exactly what part of it is the true part, but yeah.
Well, I'm not asking you because I actually don't.
That wasn't, just so you know, that wasn't on my list
no.
of things that we were talking points
I
here.
just was thinking it is St. Patrick's Day, and it's usually a holiday where people get drunk and go from bar to bar getting drunk.
Yep.
I don't know what that has to do with St. Patrick taking the gospel to
probably not,
Ireland,
yeah.
but happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. And so this is Black and White Theology episode 42. If you noticed, we are missing the black part of our Black and White Theology, so we are just doing a white and white theology.
And it doesn't get much whiter than this.
It's true. So Ron Jones has apparently more important things to do than be here.
Yeah.
And so Dan, who is our producer, has now jumped into the podcast chair. And back for today only, we have John back in the producer's chair.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be back.
John's been on some business trips this week, and but he was able to make it in today and podcast today. So until Ron gets back, we're gonna roll with Dan here and John there and me here. So we are Dan talking about worship, and that's what we've been talking about. Obviously, you've been actually a part of these conversations, and the kind of what I've kind of wanted to, and as I've been thinking about where we want to go with our topic we're calling Worship Wars, I've kind of wanted to get you in here so we could actually talk to a real live worship leader.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And so
It's hard being behind the camera for some of these conversations because it's like, I want to talk.
yeah, I know. Yeah, well, because this is your thing, right? Yeah. And so now you can do that.
Awesome.
So, I wanted to get Dan on, and I wanted him to share his perspective on these things, as this is one of the main things he does. Your role is twofold here. Your worship, and then you oversee our small group ministries and our discipleship groups. Mm-hmm. And so, let's start out. A few weeks ago, actually, it's been quite a few weeks ago, Ron and I kind of went through our backgrounds. I want you to do the same thing. Just kind of go through your background and talk about your involvement in the church and music in the church and worship, and kind of how God brought you even to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I grew up here at this church, Faith Baptist Church in Sellersville. Much of the way that you described fundamentalism in your youth described pretty much mine as well. Mm-hmm. We were very conservative. We only did hymns in church, and we were taught pretty much that anything other than that is not really appropriate for God. It's not really appropriate for church. It's not appropriate worship. So I grew up in that, and look, I always loved music, So I always, I was in a little kids choir singing Patch the Pirate songs. We should dedicate a whole episode to Patch the Pirate, because that was like a cultural thing for a lot of us growing up.
He was an icon for so many young kids in fundamentalism.
Yes.
And if you don't know who Patch the Pirate is, then look him up.
Yeah, look him up. A lot of kids stuff, but a lot of music that only some of us were allowed to listen to.
True.
But grew up in that. Sang in choirs. Back then, we had a Christian school attached to the church, so everything kind of had those standards and guidelines that musical constriction, if you will. So kind of like every teenager, junior higher, I began to rebel a little bit, and I wanted to listen to cool music and things like that, and I still probably would have thought that contemporary Christian and Christian rock was kind of wrong because you can't combine the world's music with godly ideas. But I was perfectly content listening to ungodly music.
Right, you just weren't comfortable mixing godly words with worldly music.
Yeah, like
they just need to be separate.
Yeah, like it was almost like a stipulation that if I like the music, then it must be wrong.
Yeah. Well, and so when you say you listen to like secular rock music or whatever, did you do that like secretly? Was that like
Yes.
Because you were raised by your grandparents.
Yeah. Yep.
And they were probably pretty strict with you on the music
Well,
thing?
so that's interesting because my grandmother was saved at a Pentecostal church.
Oh, really? Okay.
So she didn't have the same ideas about, like, it was all that, the conservative fundamentalism was foreign to her. And my grandfather, he pretty much just, every time I would ask him about music or any kind of a standard issue like that, he would ask, well, what does Pastor David say? And David Auckland is the founder of Faith. And so it was always like, well, what does he say? And that was their mentality. Well, we don't want to look at I don't know if it's bad, but if he says it's bad, then it must be bad. So I began in secret. I had a little clock radio, and I would put this is the lamest rebellion ever because I rebelled with soft rock, so I was like Delilah at night, and I would listen to it like on my little radio.
Like how old were you?
Like 12, 13,
okay.
When I started to appreciate girls more, then the soft rock breakup songs became, started getting more interested in music, and I think it was, one pivotal thing that happened was our youth pastor here, Don Cade at the time, he got a guitar, and he started playing in youth group.
Which was groundbreaking at the time for this church anyway.
Exactly. Now, we were singing like 70s era Maranatha music type songs, As the Deer, that kind of stuff. And that was the first time that I saw somebody play guitar. I knew that he didn't know how to play it like a year before that.
Okay.
So I saw him playing this, and I'm like, it must be accessible. Like, maybe I could do this. And I don't know, it just kind of breathed new life into like our youth group, and like, I was in a group of friends that we, for whatever reason, us guys liked to sing. So we really started getting into it. Probably my junior year, a friend of mine who went to, a liberal church. Now it was a Bible church. It just wasn't Baptist. Yeah. But their youth group went to concerts and things like that. So they were going to a Newsboys Stephen Curtis Chapman concert.
So you're talking what, late 90s?
94, yeah,
okay,
94, 95,
okay.
something like that. And so a number of us went with him. And
was that when the Newsboys were singing their breakfast song?
that was before that.
Oh,
It
it
before
was?
breakfast.
Oh, really?
It was when Shine, make 'em wonder what you got. We're probably gonna get like banned for copyright
yeah, for
infringement.
copyright infringement for that, yeah.
But the big things that Newsboys had at the time is that they had a spinning drum set, and they've been doing that for years. So as the guy's playing, like he's in this apparatus and just spinning around, and
Which was awesome, by the way.
yeah, it was awesome. But to me back then, I was like, I don't know, this doesn't seem to be glorifying to God, And it was just in that compartment. But then Stephen Curtis Chapman came on, and he had that singer-songwriter thing that I have later really identified with. And I remember coming away from that going, what in the world? Like, I thought that this would be like just garbage and and it was really good. And I really felt like I worshipped.
What was your motive for going to the concert?
Pretty much just to have fun.
Okay.
I mean, I love music still,
Yeah,
and I had honestly I'd never been to an actual concert, like a rock concert.
Okay.
So it was at Hershey Arena,
Yeah.
and packed it out. They were all youth groups, you know.
Yeah.
And my friends were going, so that was the mentality. But that was pivotal to me. That was like, wow, like that kind of rocked my world. Like, I really liked this. I could, I don't know if I could say that I could see myself doing it at that point.
Yeah.
But So some of those things started to challenge, like, okay, well, they say this is wrong. Well, where are they getting that it's wrong? And so I started asking those questions and started, digging a little deeper with, okay, they quote this verse. Let me read that verse. Let me see what, and, much of the conversation that you and Rod had,
Yep.
about a month ago was the talking points, like, is music moral? Is the beat wrong itself? It seemed to be everything that was outside of our culture was wrong, and so I kind of tucked that in the back of my head. By the time I got to be like a senior in high school, I was playing guitar. I was helping to lead the worship in our youth group, and really enjoyed that. Really started enjoying contemporary Christian and Christian rock and all that kind of stuff. I probably would have said back then that there's some bands that's just too far. Okay, they've gone too far. Sure. But really started to just love music, and I wanted to do it. I went to a fairly conservative Christian college my freshman year.
When did you start learning the guitar? Like in
I
high
was
school?
17, so
Okay.
yeah, 95. And went to a fairly conservative Christian college, which, as you know, you're not allowed to listen to anything. Like,
Yep.
they checked our music,
Yep.
So I would, give it all to them, and then I'd start sneaking some stuff, and then I'd feel guilty about it. So I'd confess and
Yep.
And by my sophomore year, I transferred to a college that was a little less strict, and they really encouraged me playing guitar, me leading worship, things like that, and it was like a whole new world. Some friends of mine and I started a band when we were out of high school, so music became a really, really big deal.
Did you guys cut any albums? You have any YouTube videos?
Oh yes, Psalm 5. You gotta look. I don't know if there's anything online, but there's some stuff out there. But yeah, and that was a bit of my journey up to through college. I started getting frustrated here at this church because there really wasn't anything for me to do. Like, and I would say at that point, we would not have said that music is a biblical issue anymore. It was more of just a standard. Hey, this is the standard that we have. Yes, like it's about preference.
Yeah, you're talking late 90s, early
Late 90s,
2000s.
yeah. Because I remember, feeling like, and I would sit down with the pastor and talk about things, and he'd be like, yeah, no, I see your point. It's not like a theological issue or anything like that, but we're going to keep the standards here. And there just wasn't much for me to do. So a friend of mine invited me out to their church, and I was able to play a little bit more and get involved that way. So the journey to worship leader through all that.
Would you say, just holding that thought, would
Yeah.
you say that one of the things that kind of led you to move away from this church was the fact that they were still very conservative with their music, and you didn't feel like there was really any opportunity for you to express yourself with the music that was really speaking to you? Was that
Yes.
one of the biggest things that led you to go to other churches? And
That, and I think I had gotten to the point after my stint at a pretty conservative fundamentalist Bible college, I just didn't want to have those conversations anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I just felt like, look, I don't think this is an issue. I really just want to go somewhere where I can serve and not have to think about that at all. And it felt like every time I came back, it was just rehashing the old stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what those two things mainly.
so, so you danced around a bit in churches, right?
Yes. And spiritually, like,
yeah.
that was a bit of a roller coaster there. I left the band that I was in and pursued my solo career at age 20. Got a lot of opportunities to play some cool things, and just wasn't really, I want to say on fire spiritually. Like, I had my moments, but I just struggled. I just struggled with loneliness and being consistent. And I was a young single guy, so I did kind of bounce around the churches. And it wasn't until I started going to a young adult Bible study, and they really loved to have somebody lead worship. And at that point, I really didn't want to do it because it was pride. I thought I was too good for it. I didn't want to just be the guitar player for the Bible study or whatever. But I started to do it, and I started to really enjoy it. And I think God started to work it in my heart a little bit. Because I started feeling a conviction that this is going to sound horrible, but I almost felt obligated to do it. Like God gave me this way to I can play, I can sing, and the least I can do is help a group sing praises, and that's what it kind of started for me, where I really started to just enjoy it on that level. And so from that point on, like every time, once a church gets the scent that you can play guitar, that you can lead or do something, they almost automatically thrust you into that, for good or for bad. There were churches that knew nothing about my spiritual background or theology or anything like that. But here, we need you to lead. So got a lot of experience that way. But it really wasn't until Pastor John Buckley, originally from here, started Upper Perk Community Church, and we started talking about. He was mentoring me at the time, and we started talking about just worship and what he foresaw in his church and how he would like to do things, and I got really excited about it, and so Jess and I and my wife decided to go and help plant that church, and but we had been gone from this community for 15 years. I had been, so
Yeah. So you led worship at that church plant for
6 years.
6 years.
Yep.
And then God, long story short, God called you back here
Yep.
to Faith in Sellersville to lead worship here, and that's where you find yourself now.
Yep.
So it is interesting how God kind of brought you for full circle. In fact, when we hired you, you were also the youth director.
That's right.
For what, 3 years maybe?
Yeah.
And
And
then
John and I kind of co-did it for a year there or so before he took over.
And then
so,
John took it over,
Yep.
and now I'm back doing youth work.
We're not a very progressive church.
We are looking for
Yes, if you know anyone.
a new youth director. But, so it's just interesting how God kind of brought you full circle back here to Faith and leading the church here. So what I want to do is we transition to the next section is I kind of want to get into the mind of a worship leader. So most people that come to church on any given Sunday morning, they see the worship leader up there leading, 4 or 5 songs. And I do get a lot of questions with people. It's like, that's it?
What does he do with his time?
What, like it doesn't seem like it's that hard of a job, do we really need to even pay somebody to do this?
Right.
Can't we just get volunteers in the church, to kind of come together and just sing and worship and praise God together? So I want to kind of get into the mind of a worship leader. I want you to share your perspective, maybe that most people don't see or even completely understand, kind of give you that opportunity to kind of talk about what it is to be a worship leader and why worship leading is important.
Yeah.
And so start out with, what do you think are some of the struggles that a worship leader have, or maybe some misconceptions that people have of worship leaders, things like that?
Well, maybe to address like the, why do we need somebody to a full-time position, or at least,
Part-time.
Part-time. And you don't. I mean, it would be awesome if we had somebody that could just donate their time to do that.
Which, before you came, we had a guy in our church that did donate and give up his time, and he did a good job with it.
Yeah.
But he came to us at some point and said, hey, I'm kind of moving, deeper into my career, and I don't have the time to give toward this anymore, so I'm going to be stepping down. And that's at that point we said, okay, well then, is there anyone else that can do what he was doing? And that was a rare thing for someone to give the amount of time that he gave as a volunteer. That was a very rare thing.
Yeah. I still, because we have a lot of the old music that he kind of put together. And some of the notes and coordination that he did, I'm like, where in the world did you have time to do this? Because there was a point where you guys had strings and horns and all that kind of stuff, So what was your question? Struggles, right?
Yeah, struggles, yep.
So one of my passions and kind of one of the opportunities that I was looking forward to in a full-time kind of ministry setting was being able to coordinate with the pastor about the message and how can the songs that we pick and the music that we do all kind of back up what you're preaching about. Because I still ultimately, at the end of the day, believe that preaching is the most important part of a Sunday morning service. And if I can do anything to help people remember something through song that you're preaching about in Scripture, that's really what I want to do.
Well, and just talking to that for a second,
Yeah.
music has such a powerful impact on us
Yeah.
in our ability to remember.
Yeah.
Like we can remember songs that we learned when we were children, but we can't necessarily remember things that we memorized, when we were kids.
Yeah.
It just, or if you, this is why some teachers put music to certain things.
Yeah. Yep.
Like let's put music to the memorizing the 50 states of America. And so music is a powerful tool.
Yeah.
That God has given us
Yeah.
and created to be used.
And the idea in Colossians when Paul talks about speaking and teaching to one another, admonishing through psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, that always stuck with me. Is I think that our church music should be doing more as far as teaching goes. And anyway, I really like the idea of because I'm not a head pastor, I'm not a teaching pastor, but I like if I can help reinforce that message that you're giving. So I think one of the things that is good, maybe not necessary, but I certainly enjoy it, is the fact that I can connect with you, kind of get an idea of where you're going in the passage, and at least attempt to kind of focus the same way. There's some weeks that are easier to do that than others.
Yeah, sometimes it's like, hey, here's a point that I'm making. Maybe it's not the main point, but it's a point in the sermon. Hey, there's a song that communicates that well. Let's go there. So there's definitely great intentionality that goes.
Yeah.
Which again, not all ministries have that kind of intentionality.
Yeah.
But felt like that's important.
Yeah.
What would you say is one of the biggest kind of frustrations that you encounter as a worship leader?
Not singing. And you always take it personally, like if the congregation doesn't sing, either I did a bad job of teaching them a song, or I did a bad job leading it, or
it's just a hard song to sing.
It's a hard song to sing, and there's sometimes that is absolutely my fault.
Yeah.
But when there's that disconnect, because there's nothing that, and we're going to get to this in the blessings of the worship leader section, but there's nothing that is better than hearing voices singing to the Lord. And so much better than hearing my own voice or my worship team and that kind of stuff. But when that doesn't happen, that can be really discouraging. And that can be kind of a mental block to kind of get over. So
I think that the worship and the music director position has the potential to face the most criticism in the church. And the reason I think that is because when it comes to preaching, that can undergo criticism because you could say something controversial. Okay, fair enough. Or you could, you might not be that engaging as a communicator because you just maybe not as gifted as in communicating or in something you have to work on. But when it comes to music, everyone has a very, very particular taste. You can go through a worship set on a Sunday and have 50% of the people say that was awesome, and 50% of the people walk away and say,
right,
it didn't do much for me. So how do you handle that when there's negative kind of criticism of what you feel like you've put a lot of time and effort into?
That's not easy, and it's not easy to say this, but like remembering who it's for. It's for God. It's all the glory goes to Him, and those are easy words to say, but especially on stage, that's hard to remember. Especially in terms of there are people that I'm sure adamantly disagree with my philosophy. Maybe not so much now, but like in the years past and stuff, and they've left the church, and that it just stinks that oh man, I'm somewhat like a reason for them moving on. Now, it's just no matter how much logically I can say, well, this was inevitable, it just stinks. I'm at heart a people pleaser, so I want people to be happy, to be happy with me, especially. So there's a big part of that too, where I have to kind of take captive this idea that that I'm doing it for people to like, as opposed to challenge and to worship and to redirect. So,
Yeah, I think who you're doing it for, and also keeping in mind, okay, am I pushing the limits with this particular congregation? Because some congregations are more accepting of certain things than other congregations, and so you have to know and understand your particular congregation, the culture that you're in. Which is why we're not pushing the limits with hip hop. In our Sunday services here in Sellersville.
That, and perhaps I'm not the most gifted hip hop artist, but yeah,
I don't know. I think you could give it a shot.
I'll try.
I think that with regards to people's individual tastes, I think sometimes you got to be Am I leaning too far in the area of my own personal tastes?
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes when criticism comes, sometimes you have to be honest and say, okay, maybe they have a point. Maybe I need to consider that. So I think that's one thing that I think we've all learned. Because I oversaw the worship ministries for a few years here, and it's like, okay, am I really just pushing toward what I like, or am I really considering everybody that's in the congregation? And so, yes, there is this element to where when we plan out our music and we decide, hey, this is the style of music that we're going to move forward with. Because, I mean, some churches will roll with a kind of a different style. Like some will do more real conservative one week, and the next week it'll be more, contemporary. And then the next week it'll be maybe a blend, We've chosen philosophically here to kind of go with just a general sound.
Yeah.
Right? That is what I would call more what is now the traditional music of the church, which was the contemporary music of the church 20 years ago. Traditional, praise and worship with a band, guitar, piano, whatever instruments we have. But we've just made the choice to go with what I would say is a consistent kind of sound. But we blend the types of songs we sing. We sing the ancient hymns. We sing modern praise songs. We even do once a month a hymn sing, where all we do is hymns. In
Once
fact,
every other month.
I'm sorry, it used to be every month. Once every month.
Now it's only
So just this past Sunday, you led your first hymn sing, and we had a gentleman from our church who was leading the hymn sings before that, and he's moved on. But now you're leading the hymn sings, and so we have nights where we just sing the ancient hymns. Yeah. And when I say ancient, I don't really mean ancient in the sense of hundreds of years ago, but some of them, but more so in the past 100 years. Because when I say hymns, some people are like, no, anything written in the 1500s, that's what we sing. The Reformation hymns of the 15, 16, 1700s.
And that brings up a good point, too, because these terms all have different definitions to people.
Yep.
So when I first started, we were talking a lot about blended worship.
Yep.
Now, to me, blended worship meant that I'm still going to be kind of singing everything in the same musical style, but we are going to do older songs, newer songs. But to some people, that meant we're going to do hymns with an organ, and then we're going to do some more modern stuff.
Yep.
So all these terms are defined differently.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think your role is difficult in the sense that you have a very diverse congregation out there, and we do have a pretty diverse congregation in the sense of age groups and different people's backgrounds and things like that. And so we're not a primarily just young church or a primarily older generation church. We do have a blend of generations, and that actually makes it really difficult because you're always going to have someone that's feeling like, well, he's not doing enough maybe for my generation as I would like him to. And boy, if he would just do more, then it would be so much better.
Right.
And that's kind of the and so I think that can be a challenge. But while there are challenges and you face criticism, what would you say are the blessings of actually being a worship leader?
Well, first of all, and we mentioned it before, like just when there is that connection and people are just singing together in unity, it's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things to hear. And music, for as divisive as it can be in the church sometimes, we forget how unifying music is.
Yeah, for sure.
And there are certainly times when it brings us together. One of the things that, and we've talked about this recently too, like over Christmas, I just got really, really bored with the way that we did our Christmas Eve service in the years past, and just did the same thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It just was the same thing. And so I just thought, well, maybe we'll do a choir thing this year. And that's absolutely out of my comfort zone. Yeah. It ended up being, I'll call it a success because, we got people to participate in it. And it was the spectrum of people. Like, so that diverse congregation that we're talking about, it felt like there was a little representation of everyone in there. And look, for a first effort, I think we pulled it off okay. Nobody fell over or anything.
Yeah.
But for me, like, whenever we can bring people together through worship as well, is really, really meaningful.
And that speaks to our philosophy here at Faith, anyway, to some degree, where we are not in the business of putting on professional productions for spectators to come and observe.
Yeah.
That's not, philosophically, we want to put on worship service, we want to do worship services, we want to plan worship services where we invite people to participate and come in.
Yeah.
Which means it may not have a well-polished production value as maybe other churches.
Yeah.
And we're okay with that. So, for instance, the choir didn't sound like, the Brooklyn Tabernacle choir.
Well, and you're just telling me this now?
Actually, I wasn't there. I was away.
Yeah.
I did
You
catch
streamed it, right?
I did stream it while I was. So it's funny. I was in Tennessee in not Memphis.
Knoxville, Nashville.
Nashville. I was in Nashville, just outside of Nashville on Christmas Eve. Now, you've been to Nashville area, and there are a lot of churches in the Nashville area, a lot.
Yep.
And because every musician that's trying to make it lives in Nashville, they also have a lot of really, really talented musicians that are leading worship in these churches in Nashville. So every church you go to in Nashville has some, aspiring musician who's really accomplished and really good. So there's, and I was at such a church where they actually did a really good job. They actually did a good job of having really, really great, excellent musicians up there, but they invited you into the worship. Whereas I think a lot of other churches, especially for Christmas Eve, hey, we're going to put on a show for you, and you just sit and watch. Yeah. But and I actually want to talk about that a little bit next week as Ron gets back and talk about that philosophy. But yeah, I did pull out my phone and say, hey, what's going on, at my church? And there was the choir. It was awesome. I loved it, because, did it sound...
And then you turned us off and watched the real church.
Yeah. But my point is, did it sound amazing? I'm like, where the voices are blending, everything. You had some, some older people, some younger people, some people that maybe couldn't sing that well. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe they all could sing well. Maybe, if you're listening and you were in the choir, you were awesome. But what I'm saying is, our goal and our point philosophically was to engage people, invite people in to worship, and that's what we want to do, and we want to kind of avoid the production that you just observe and watch. Yeah. And so I think you have to know as a church what your philosophy is regarding worship and regarding music and what you're going to do. And so before I get into that, I want to ask you one more question. Is there anything that if there's one thing that you would want your church to know, or that worship leaders want their church to know, what would that be?
I think foundationally that we want to be able to not just point you to Jesus, but like our biggest goal is that you worship. Mm-hmm. I read a really neat article recently, and it was a little bit more critical of the modern worship era. Yep. But the guy just would not get over, like, no, they're not worship leaders, they're song leaders. They're not worship leaders, they're song leaders. And I get the sentiment because, worship is so much more than music.
Yeah. And Ron and I talked about that in our last episode,
But what I what I aspire to do is encourage that worship throughout life, like that it's not just singing this song, but how are we becoming living sacrifices, and going forward. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that, my heart for worship is that the church, we as a whole community, grow closer to God through worship and through every area of our life,
Yeah. And adding to that, I think even from a leadership standpoint, I would say, in addition to what you just said, is most worship leaders most worship leaders are not up there to advance themselves. They're really not. Not if their focus is right. Now, I know that can be the temptation. They can make it all about me and my production and my vocals and my guitar and worship leaders like that tend to become divas and they get mad at everybody and the sound guy can't do it right, the lighting guy's off, but by and large most worship leaders I've run into have a real heart's desire to say not about me, about him. And I think people need to understand that that's the heart of a true worship leader. Because I think sometimes people are like, well, there he goes again, and some undue criticism comes when I think people need to realize, no, he's really trying to usher you into a space where your focus is upward.
Yeah.
And I think in order to do that, we need to have a level of excellence within our worship ministries. So I want to take the last 10 minutes here and just talk about, first of all, what does it take for you, or what goes into developing an excellent praise and worship time, on a normal Sunday morning? What really goes into that?
Communication is the biggest part of it because music is a language. You guys talked about that. And we all speak it at varying levels. Some people are great at reading music and the theoretical part of it. Some people feel it and hear it by ear, play by ear, I'm definitely more of the latter. And some of our musicians are more of the former. So there's always that.
And by the way, you're the only paid musician, right? Everyone else is volunteer.
Yeah.
So that adds. So when you're leading a church ministry, you're working with all volunteers. No one has to do this, and no one's getting paid to be here. They're giving of their own time, and that poses a little bit of a challenge too when you just lead volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. But that can be a really encouraging thing too, because that like none of us are, professional musicians. I guess I am a professional musician because it's my profession.
Sure.
But none of us are playing gigs on the weekends at places like that. So when we come together, it means a little something different. It's kind of cool. But the challenge in communicating to everyone is everybody's at different levels, and I think a lot of artistic types have a lot of ideas in their head, and it's hard to get them out and to really and to encouragingly no, you're not doing that right, as opposed to, hey, what if you tried this, or so communication is certainly I think a huge aspect to excellent worship. I think the other side of it is balancing. You want people to use their skills and their talents. Like, for instance, we have an electric guitar player. Now, fortunately, he's not a Van Halen kind of like, shredder, right? But, I've seen churches where they'll take a pause in a song and they'll have this like electric guitar solo, and the guy's going to town, and you can tell that he's just reliving all of those, failed opportunities from his high school years. And but I've also seen it done well. Yeah. And where it can actually complement the worship, even though there's no words going on at that point, but it can. So there's a balance there that is tough. And so the hard part is you don't want to be a distraction. You don't want to distract away from the message, the worship, God. But you want to encourage everybody to fully use their talents. So, I think that's part of excellence as well, is that we want to be so good that you almost don't notice us. Yeah. And,
So when we talk about excellence, do you think it matters on a given Sunday and we kind of touched on this, but does it matter what songs we sing?
Sure.
Why does that matter?
I think
why does it matter that you put thought into what songs we sing?
I was asked this once at an interview, like, what's my guardrails for worship? It's a good question. And I think maybe now I have a better answer 10 years later. Like, obviously, truth is a guardrail. Like, we want these songs to be accurate to truth. And look, there's a lot of songs, and somebody recently, I picked a song that I just thought, man, this is gonna be cool. It'll be the congregation will really get into this, and it'll be just a fun, good song. Yeah. And one of our dear ladies in the church reached out to me and said, I'm just really not comfortable with this because I grew up this way, and it makes me feel like it's saying this. And I had not thought about that. And my initial response was like, whatever, But then I started thinking about it from that perspective. It's like, I never really thought about it that way. Yeah. So, for instance, like, I probably won't do that song again. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it matters. I think it matters that I don't know. I feel like us being on the same page, at least about some of the core songs.
Yeah.
We like to end the service with a song.
Yep.
And most of the time, you pick that song. And I love that because you know where you're going to end message-wise. And so, yeah, I think the song choosing is vital.
How important is singability of a song for a congregation? Because there's a lot of great songs out there that you hear on the radio, and we go through this as we plan, that it's like, oh, let's try this. Yeah. And then we try it, and we're like, okay.
Yeah. It either isn't a congregational song, or it's either so high or so low. And that's always a challenge, especially when you're trying to lead with men and women.
Yep.
And look, we live in a weird in the church world, right? Because, 30, 40 years ago, men just kind of went to their bass parts. Women kind of sang their soprano parts. Most of the hymns are kind of written so that the women can take the lead, and the guys just finds the parts around it. But we don't really teach that kind of music anymore, to our detriment. We're hoping to correct some of that. But so to find a melody that is accessible for everyone is difficult.
Yeah. Yep.
But it is important, because if you don't feel like you can participate, that's a distraction.
Yeah.
And look, in our most spiritual moment, we should all be able to worship through anything.
Yeah.
The song's not in the right key, but our heart should. But at the same time, you're not always that aware.
Yeah.
So.
We're actually going to get in next week with Ron about the conversation, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable in worship. And so, I think the songs you sing matter. Just because it sounds great on the radio doesn't mean you should sing it on Sunday morning. And
I've learned that the hard way.
What do you think about special music? That used to be a big thing in our church.
Yeah.
We don't really do it as much anymore. What's your thoughts on that?
I love it as long as it is intentional.
Okay.
I've been a part of churches, and I think Faith was kind of like this at one point too. Sorry, touching the mic. Where we just have a special music calendar, and hey, it's your week to sing special music. It has nothing to do with the message. It has nothing to do with anything else, but we just like having special music.
Yep. I think it was every Sunday.
And I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. I just don't really see the point of that. I love special music when it really drives home the point of whatever it is that the service is about. So if there's a special number that really captures what you're saying in your message, I love that.
Yeah.
Or if we're having like a hymn sing or something that's a little less singular in the point, and we can kind of spread out the ideas a little bit more. I love special music. I think that the church needs to do a better job, at least in our circles, of encouraging. I'm going to use a word that's going to get me in trouble, but performance that is God honoring.
Yep.
Like we would go to a concert, and for a godly Christian artist, and enjoy that. And for me, like I really can worship in those moments. Yeah. Not everybody can, but I love those moments. So I would love to see more special music, but not just for the sake of special music.
What about Patriotics? No, I'm not going to go into that discussion today. We don't have time for that, but maybe we will at one point.
You just opened it up to a whole new podcast.
Yeah, I know. I did. Okay, so does it matter how well, and you did touch on this a little bit when you talked about what goes into excellence in a worship service, but does it matter how well the musicians or vocalists perform, or should we just give everybody, who wants to, be up there an opportunity to lead, regardless of their skill level?
Yeah. I would love to be more inclusive with the worship team. But at the end of the day, you don't want to be a distraction.
Yeah.
And people that, I don't think that we're doing any favors for people that aren't cut out for a ministry, whatever that ministry is, to encourage them to stay in it. Because there's probably something that they could be doing better somewhere else. So
you've had to go to people and say, hey, maybe this isn't the best fit for you?
Yeah, and that's never easy. I never liked the idea of having auditions and things like that. But at the same time, you really do need to know what we're all capable of, what our strengths and weaknesses are. And look, none of us are perfect musicians up there.
Yep.
Just watch us any Sunday morning. Like, I'm making mistakes. I forget the words, usually because the clicker guy isn't going fast enough. Anyway,
guitar strings break.
But yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, like I wouldn't let anybody preach.
Yeah.
I'm amazed you'll let me sometimes. But really, I mean, if you're not really gifted for that, I don't think it's going to help anybody.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, there is a gifting that God gives people, and some people are not gifted to sing, right? I'm not on the worship team.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. And so...
but as a drummer...
I did dabble in my day.
Right?
I dabbled in my day.
We might need to pull those out again.
So last question here. Does the environment that you create within your sanctuary matter? So I'm talking about, does lighting matter? Does projection matter? Does, visuals, does that matter?
I'm not the biggest, me in aesthetics, like as far as appearances and stuff. Every once in a while, like early on in my career here at Faith, Doug would let me like pick the backgrounds and then inevitably change it because it was horrible. It just didn't look right because I just didn't think about it that way. I would say from my perspective, like whatever is not a distraction and can put people at ease, So I think there is some probably science behind like a certain lighting that makes people comfortable and things like that. Just as long as we can still get together in a gym once in a while and just sing songs to God, you know?
Yeah.
So, look, we're a very blessed church. We have the means to make things sound good and make things look good. So I think that we are somewhat responsible to do that, to do it in an excellent way. But our worship doesn't require that.
Right. That's a good point.
Like it's nice, and I think whatever we can do to welcome people and make them feel comfortable is a good thing.
When I go to Uganda and I see them worshiping in a open air kind of basically what would be the equivalent of like an open air pavilion, with no instrumentation, and they're worshiping and singing at the top of their lungs. Yeah. You don't need that. However, I think creating an environment that is conducive for people to focus, using elements of visual worship that can direct people to consider truth or direct people's focus and attention can be great. But to the point, if you're dependent upon the production to generate people's emotions and worship, I think you're focusing on the wrong things.
Yep, absolutely.
So. All right, well, that is all we have time for today. So, John, take us out with some music, huh? And
you really should have had some of my music to play.
Some Psalm 5.
That's right.
Or what were you? What was your latest?
Constitution and Ninth.
Constitution and Ninth, which you guys are disbanded for now, or just taking a little break. Okay.
Raising kids, that kind of stuff.
All right. We hopefully will see you back next week with Pastor On, and keep going. Have a good week.